think I'm having a eureka moment.
What are you seeing?
What does that look like to you?
Chemical analysis shows elevated levels of tricalcium silicate deposition on the surface of the Earth in a mixture of other chemicals spread out over ever larger and larger regions over time, it seems. The tricalcium silicate seems to comprise about 50% of the chemical composition of the material shown in these light areas on the map here. And the rest seems to be dicalcium silicate, 25%, tricalcium aluminate, 10%, tetracalcium aluminiferrite, 10%, and then gypsum, 5%. The presence of these chemicals on the landscape varies radically in thickness, ranging from a few inches in these crisscrossing lines here to hundreds of feet in these areas, while the thinner material lines seem to converge. And the temporal analysis suggests their presence in the biosphere has been increasing steadily for decades. Look, there's also huge square and triangular patches and a vast latticework of stripes and lines composed of bitumen. See those here and here?
Bitumen. You mean the sticky, black, and highly viscous liquid, or the semi-solid form of petroleum today known as asphalt? Along with the other stuff, which we now call cement and concrete, their presence seems to correlate with increase in human population, according to my GIS data layers. Definitely evidence of land use change.
Yeah. Remember when people were talking back in the day about global crowding? Around the time when Donella Meadows published The Limits to Growth and Paul Ehrlich published The Population Bomb. Well, you're probably too young to really remember it, of course, but what you're seeing there, that looks like strong evidence for what we used to call global crowding for sure.
I think the data here is rather self-evident, almost incontrovertible. Looks to me like evidence for landscape change.
Yeah, well, that is what people are calling it now, especially since crowding has fallen out of fashion. Apparently, it got too political. Even though the trends were clear, but landscape change, yes, what you're looking at there certainly indicates change in the landscape.
Absolutely. I mean, look at it. Here. To the same area back in the 1960s when you were a kid. And here it is when I was a kid in the 1990s, a generation later. And here it is today after another generation. When I run the spatial analysis in QGIS, it tells me the overall LCI, or Landscape Change Index, is 1.91, with extreme acceleration in the third quarter. That's pretty significant, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. But unfortunately, these compelling statistics probably won't have any effect on the landscape change skeptics. The issue's become so politically divisive, you know? These days, people don't pay much attention to the data. We need something more compelling.
But just look at it. Isn't it obvious the landscape has changed over time? Look at the buildings that are here now that weren't here just 10 years ago. And the highways and the loss of forest cover and wetlands. Just judging by population, you can tell things have changed. Look at these numbers. This town, Tampa, had only about 275,000 people in 1960. By 1990, it was 281,000. This year, it is 335,000. The annual growth rates were, from 1960 to 1970, plus 0.1% per year.
Right, in 1970, 1980, negative 0.23% per year, and 1980 1990, plus 0.34%, 1990 to 2000, 0.75% per year. What else we got here? 2000 to 2005, 1.55% per year. 2005 to 2010 is 0.54%. 2010 to 2014 looks like the last time we have data on this, 1.67% per year. Yeah, I mean, it's good data, but the skeptics are going to say that the changes aren't all in the direction of global crowding. I mean, they're going to point to the decade of 1970 to 1980 when there was actually negative growth.
But the trend! And look, from 1960 to the year 2000, the growth was single and double digits. Then it jumps to triple digits growth for the most of the next 2 decades.
You're right, but the skeptics will look at the drop in growth rate here from 2005 to 2010, where it dropped from 1.55% to 5.54%, even though it leaped up to 1.67% from 2010 onward. And they're going to claim the direction of change isn't consistent or dramatic. They'll just pawn it off as natural variation.
Seems they're always taking too granular approach, cherry-picking sections in the data to bolster their own arguments. The overall trend shows the landscape change is real, not a hoax.
Yeah, especially if you zoom out and look at the longitudinal data. If you look at this extreme jump in population between 1950 and 1960, population more than doubled from 125,000 to 275,000. That's crazy. And it never really went down again, see? I mean, there was an inconsequential dip, a loss of a mere 6,000 people between 1970 and 1980. But then the city gained 9,000 people in the next decade. The skeptics might argue that populations go up and down all the time, but things never went back to the way they were in 1950, nowhere near. It would be like saying that a decade of somewhat colder winters and occasional snowfall negates the overall trend toward ever hotter winters over half a century with no frost at all. I mean, that would be absurd logic. But still, the landscape change deniers won't see the evidence for global crowding. In their mind, it simply isn't happening, and the very idea is some kind of Chinese hoax.
Oh, don't get me started on China. They went from 552 million people in 1950 to 1.4 billion today. That's nearly 3 times the number of people in a mere 68 years. Just 2 generations. And this is despite their one-child policy. Population control policies. At that rate, they will be over 6 billion by the year 2100. And that's what the entire population of Earth was just back in 1999. Can't happen. The carrying capacity of the Earth won't allow it.
I think the more interesting trend analysis is for the years from 1850 to 1950. See, for the first 4 decades of that period, the population stayed between 700 and 1,000 people here in Tampa.
By 1890,
it jumped up to 5,500 people, and then 10 years later, it tripled to 15,000, and then quadrupled in the next 20 years, and then in the next 10 years, it doubled again, reaching over 100,000. So it looks a lot like global crowding to me.
What are you guys doing? What's that?
This is a QGIS map of landscape changes in Tampa with the population census data layer overlaid. And this is a graph of population data showing very clear indications that we are experiencing global crowding.
Global crowding? Oh no, don't tell me you've fallen for that malarkey. How on earth do you go from population increases in Tampa to global crowding? For all you know, people are moving into Tampa from other parts of Florida and the world. Depopulating those areas. It all balances out. It's natural.
What? Balances out?
Sure. I just read a report that said many parts of Africa are underpopulated. They have a labor shortage. And look at the number of refugees trying to get in here from the Middle East. Nobody lives there anymore. It's just desert and bombed out areas because all of their terrorists and stuff.
Biff, this is a graph of world population. This isn't a regional thing. At the same time that Tampa's growth has gone from 920 in the year 1850, the entire Earth has gone from 1.2 billion to 7.6 billion. I don't think you can describe that as populations balancing out.
Okay, Professor, we see some changes for sure. But change is natural. All populations expand over time, just like bacteria in a petri dish. It doesn't mean it's anthropogenic.
Do you even know what anthropogenic means?
What do you think? Just because I disagree with you, I'm stupid? Anthropogenic means human cause. I know that, but I'm saying our population increase is natural. All animals do it. You can't say that our expanding population is anthropogenic when it's merely natural.
Wait, human population isn't caused by humans? Are you daft?
I mean, we are involved, obviously, but it isn't like we are all to blame. Look at how the people in third world countries are breeding like grass. If you want to blame somebody, at least we use birth control.
Well, you are out of
Who,
control.
me? I have a right to my opinion, don't I?
We're talking about global crowding or landscape change. Even if you were right about who's having more children, you still have to agree that overpopulation is having an impact, right?
Sure, but like I said, it is natural, and sometimes we have to fight nature, like by building a wall to keep the people who are overbreeding out. But what you guys are doing is blaming all of us for the actions of those irresponsible people.
Me blaming all of us for the actions of a few irresponsible people?
Your logic eludes me. First, there is no change, but then there is, but it's not our fault. And first you say we aren't responsible, but then we are, but not all of us?
Well, there are bad people in the world, sure, I'll give you that, but they aren't us. We only have a couple kids on average.
But per capita, we each consume about 4 to 5 times what people in other countries consume. For example, Americans constitute 5% of the world's population, but they consume 24% of the world's energy. That means our population of 326 million consumes the equivalent of more than a billion Indians.
And we deserve it, because we generate wealth. Our economy is growing, and we help lift others out of poverty. See, you're still confusing population change, population growth, with the fictions you call landscape change and global crowding. First of all, there is no crowding. By building skyscrapers in cities, and by doing intensive agriculture, and by landscaping with beautiful parks and parkways, we've made America more beautiful than ever. There is plenty of space, so even though our gross population is larger, we aren't crowded. Second, you keep acting as though landscape change is a bad thing. I don't see the correlation between population growth and negative landscape changes. Just look at New York City. It has more green space than ever. Look what they did with the High Line. It's like a 1.5 mile long linear park, greenway, and rail trail. It was created on a former New York Central Railroad spur in the west side of Manhattan in New York City, and makes the area far more beautiful and green than it was back when the population was about half what it is today, when it was a blighted area. And as far as Tampa, Fox News reported that Tampa has been named the country's top tree city.
Fox News.
Well, hey, they talked about an MIT study that showed factoring in Tampa's population density, the city earned something like 36.1% Green View Index, beating other large cities around the world, including notoriously tree-friendly Vancouver, with something in the area of 25.9%, Sacramento, 23.6%, and Oslo, 28.8%. I rest my case.
Well, you certainly have your facts down.
This is so typical. You look at a few gains in quality of life in wealthier areas that are actually wealthy at the expense of other regions and people to justify your complete denial of the negative influences of human activity. And you have talked out both sides of your mouth. First, you argue there is no such thing as landscape change. Then you say it has in fact changed, but that it is natural and has nothing to do with us. Then you say the landscape has actually changed in many places in bad ways because of people, but only the people you describe as bad people. And then you argue that, on the other hand, it is changing, but it is actually changing for the better and only because of the actions of those whom you think of as good people. You deny there is any global crowding because in your reality, the wealthy have created uncrowded enclaves for themselves. For people like you, with private parks and expensive, over-policed, public-private areas that look pretty, but you are exclusive. Your whole argument seems to be classist to the core, and rather racist.
Oh, there you go, playing the race card again. Typical.
Okay, guys, I think your discussion of political ecology and political economy is fascinating, but as scientists, we're simply interested in getting consensus over whether landscape change is real, whether it is anthropogenic, and whether it is the result of global crowding. So the first question is the Earth getting more crowded? i.e., are there more people per unit area on average? And is that trend moving toward less land available on Earth per capita or more?
Obviously, the data show more people on the planet since the Pleistocene, with an increase after agriculture and then a huge, ever-accelerating growth spurt at the beginning of the Industrial Age. Since the amount of land on the Earth hasn't changed, this is proof of a global trend in global crowding. Even if wealthy countries like Abu Dhabi carve out a few new islands in the ocean for luxury hotels and investments, an investment in Israel makes some parts of the desert bloom. Global crowding by that definition is real, no matter what you think of it being good or bad.
Well, then you should call it global crowding. Crowding implies it is universally bad.
Oh, these are semantics. How about if we call it global growing? You agree the data shows the population is growing.
Well, sure, but that is natural.
Okay, whatever. Everything is natural. That doesn't mean it's good. Doesn't mean it's bad. Fine. And humans are a part of nature, right?
I guess so.
Okay. And given the IPAT equation, IPAT, where environmental impact I is the product of three factors: population P, affluence A, and technology T. P equals population and refers to the total number of people on the planet. You'd have to agree that higher population inevitably means higher impact, right?
I see what you're trying to... Yeah, the more humans there are, the more impact we have. But it doesn't mean all impact is bad.
No, of course not, of course not. When we say that global growing of human population leads to landscape changes, we're basically just acknowledging the truth of the IPAT model. For those who are beneficiaries of these changes, the impact on the landscape seems good. For those who experience greater crowding, loss of ecosystem and municipal services, and experience poverty and disease and suffering, the impact I is bad. But we're first just trying to acknowledge that the impact is real. And when you look at this land use map that Kiana has created in her GIS program, it's pretty clear that the landscape is changing. You're not disagreeing with that, are you?
As long as you don't politicize it and start blaming the wrong people, I'm fine with it.
We are politicizing it? Us? And look, we aren't blaming the wrong people. We are blaming people who are doing the wrong thing.
Nicely said.
The people who are using the wrong technologies. The T in IPAT. Yet have the affluence, A, that would technically enable them to transition to lower bad impact outcomes and higher good impact outcomes for everyone. Like developing green eco-cities, kind of like Brazil's mayor did in Curitiba, but it would be done with liberty and justice for all.
Well, now see, that's where you lose me. Why should the rich among us have to pay for things for everybody else? For all the freeloaders. They should take care of themselves. It's not my fault some places are shithole countries or shithole areas where landscape changes are happening in a bad way. If they want to have pretty golf courses, those people should plant some trees and mow the lawn. They have to want to have a positive impact. You can't say just because my area is pretty, I gotta make it pretty for everybody else.
But the people who are making your place pretty are usually the ones whose practices are making other places impossible to live in.
That's the whole point of environmental justice, to make sure that people who are doing well don't do so by hurting others.
See, that's where you lose me.
Wait, you need to take some political ecology and political economy classes. But anyway, I'm glad that we all now agree that the landscape is changing and that human population and human activity have a lot to do with it. Actually, the most to do with it. Can we now look at the data for sea changes? It seems to me that there's been a sea change, literally, in the way the seascape has been changing. I mean, coral bleaching, anyone? Sea level rise, massive gyres of garbage floating in the ocean, plastic microbeads in the food chain, collapses of fisheries, loss of biodiversity, bioaccumulation of toxins in fish, massive oil spills, methyl mercury poisoning, calving of glaciers, radiation in the Antarctic. Am I missing anything?
You want me to agree that those are anthropogenic too?
You have another explanation? You don't think that the seas are changing? Have you gone scuba diving in the last 40 years like I have all over the world? Have you seen the degradation? Have you seen the loss of our pristine seas?
No, but as a Floridian who wants to make a career in sustainable tourism, I am concerned about the impact of sea changes on our economy. I can't run a business if we keep having red tides killing off our tourism industry, so yeah, I am ready to blame certain people, like the idiots in the sugarcane industry, whose irresponsible growing techniques with chemical fertilizers and monocropping agriculture, the folks who diverted waters away from cleansing aquifers to destroy Everglades and all that. I'm concerned about our environment. I am. So, yeah, I think the sea is changing, and I think people are doing a lot of it. Certainly the stuff about oil spills and agricultural runoff. But we are also creating artificial reefs and turtle and dolphin-safe fishing nets and working to keep the Chinese trawlers from raping our waters, so some of us are doing good things.
You aren't against a ban on plastic bags and plastic straws?
I don't think they should be banned, but I think we can charge more for them and provide substitutes.
So you agree that sea change is happening and human beings are responsible, right?
Well, for the most part.
So you agree that we humans can affect the land and affect the sea. Our growing population and our actions can affect the biosphere, the hydrosphere, and the geosphere in general.
Sure, but
What about the lithosphere and the asthenosphere? Well, would you agree that drilling for oil and gas and coal affects them, especially since these resources are found in the lithosphere and the asthenosphere and the geosphere? I mean, removing them does cause changes, doesn't it? Sure. Okay, so what about the atmosphere? Are we able to cause changes in the atmosphere like we do the lithosphere and the asthenosphere? Does air pollution cause changes in the atmosphere? Enough to cause asthma, lung disease, eye irritation, acid rain, changes in the ozone layer, loss of forest cover? Sure. So there is anthropogenic atmospheric change. And changes in the atmosphere, like when we see clouds with silver iodide, potassium iodide, dry ice, solid carbon dioxide, and liquid propane, which expands into a gas to make it rain, we affect cloud formation and the weather, right?
where are you going with this?
And when volcanoes erupt, or meteors hit, or we detonate bombs, throw particles into the air like sulfur dioxide and dust, they can lead to significant local cooling by blocking sunlight from coming in until they rain out, right?
So we can cool things temporarily by blocking sunlight or dimming it.
And if we put invisible gases like methane, nitrous oxide, and oxides of carbon into the air that allow high-energy ultraviolet visible electromagnetic spectrum waves of light from the sun to reach the Earth, but are opaque to longer wavelength infrared radiation, then you would agree that we can retain the longer waves of energy in the atmosphere. Yes?
Sounds reasonable.
Okay.
And if enough people around the world contribute these infrared wavelength trapping molecules to our global atmosphere, and there are a lot of people now participating in these releases.
No.
No, we've agreed on people's power to change the landscape and the oceans, right? So, what is your position on climate change?